So what we're gonna talk in the next unit is different types of infection, the disease transmission. I hope there will be some really revealing things for you, especially about the infection stuff. And we're gonna start with a thing that we have mentioned on several occasions already. That not all the microbes, actually the majority of microbes, are not pathogenic. Okay? And we are not sterile organisms. There are different communities that we often refer to as microbiome, okay, that can be found in different sites of the human body. That's the brief list of microbiome. So, skin. Think about this. Everything that is in the contact with the outside world can harbor microbiota. Skin, respiratory tract. Now, if we talk about respiratory tract, we talk about the upper one. Nose, pharynx, ears, yes. Lungs, the general consensus is there is no stable microbiome in the lungs. Okay? Although we inhale air and, it's technically in contact with an outside world, by the time air reaches the lungs, it's pretty clear. And alveolar macrophages do a good job in taking care of the invaders. So lungs are considered to be sterile. The upper respiratory tract is definitely not. GI, different parts have different habitations. For instance, stomach is mostly free of microbes because of the rough conditions. Small intestine is not really inhabited, but large intestine is an enormous number of microbes. Okay, eyes, we can consider it being a part of the skin, like outer coverings. Okay, same goes for ear. Genitalia, the external parts. Although in males it's easier, so it's a mucosal surface of the penis, like glans penis, will be of course covering microbiota. In females, vaginal microbiota plays a crucial role in protecting against the sexually transmitted diseases. Outer portion of urethra, very outer portion. So if you go deeper in the urethra, it's sterile normally. Does that make sense? Now, why microbiome is so important? It protects. Okay? It occupies ecological niches, competes for resources, preventing pathogens from taking hold. And now it is more and more appreciated that the microbiome can actually shape the immune response. From the time that we're born, we are exposed to microbes. And it is known that kids who encounter more microbial cells in life, higher variety, kids in households with animals are less prone to allergy, which is the classical autoimmune disease. Kids that were delivered by a C-section have different immune status compared to kids that are born by a natural route. Okay, does that make sense? So somehow we don't know how. I mean, we do. We know the immune mechanisms, but we can't really figure out each and every consequence. We know that this is different. We know that the more natural, the better. Okay, eat the dirt, get breastfed and stuff like that. Okay, play with animals. Now, there are different types of microbes that can be found in the body sites. Resident microbes are normally inhabiting sites. On the skin, it's going to be Micrococcus luteus and Staph epidermidis, for example. In the intestines, it's going to be mostly bacteroidetes of different types. On the eyes, it's going to be staphylococci, streptococci of different sorts. In the mouth, it's going to be streptococcus and spirochetes. So you see that types of microbes that inhabit each body site, they're different. And you also will find similarities. For instance, Propionibacterium acnes, which is a normal component of the skin microbiome, and Staph epidermidis can be commonly found in the nose, because that's where we stick our hands to. Make sense? These guys are resident, which means they here or there all the time. Some microbes can be transient, passing through, okay? Maybe pathogenic, may not be pathogenic, okay? And some microbes can be opportunistic. Now, this is something that I want to focus on specifically. Opportunistic microbe can be normally a component of the microbiome. When we will look at these plates on Wednesday, we're going to find few people here in the class with Staphylococcus aureus in the nose. Tracy asked me, should they worry? Not really. It's a normal component. However, if they become immunocompromised, these microbes can cause respiratory infection. So they will use opportunity. Does that make sense? Yes. Overgrowth of E. coli in the gut in a certain situation. C. diff. It is known that members of the household of C. diff patients, they all are C. diff carriers. Okay? So they can become patients if you treat them with antibiotics. Does that make sense? Do you understand the idea of opportunistic? Opportunistic is not a primary pathogen. It does not cause the disease all the time. If you get plague, you will probably get sick. Okay? If I get what? Klebsiella, I will probably not get sick because I am otherwise healthy. Does it make sense? Do you see the difference? Okay.
So if you say you were going through chemo or something and your immune system was compromised,
Yes.
so you would be likely to.
Develop opportunistic infections.
Other than that, it's
Other than that, it's harmless.
harmless.
Yeah. Like Staph epidermidis that we looked at, skin microbe. It's opportunistic pathogen. In severely immunocompromised patients, like really bad. Wound infections, sepsis, it can be a pathogen, but you really have to kill the immunity entirely. Does that make sense? Where do we get the microbes? Brief answer: everywhere. We get it as kids. We first. What is the first place we get microbes? The very, very first. No. No. Well, see. Okay, after C-section. What? Okay. What is the first? Wait a minute. What is the first place you get microbes if you were born via C-section? Doctor. Yes. Hands of a surgeon. If you were born via natural route. Yes, vaginal canal. And that determines a lot of difference. Okay? And then you start to get it from the skin, mom's skin, you start to get it from everything you leak. When now that's a great question. I don't know about OBGYN practices here. My kids were born. I always say I have perfect case for microbiology. I have one experimental and one control. Okay. So one of them, and that's what happened. One of them was born with the blocked lacrimal canal, and he had a huge inflammation of the eye because pretty much there was no tear drainage. And they treated him with antibiotics, so he had tetracycline ointment on his eye several days. That's the guy who has all the allergies, all weird intestinal digestive problems. So his microbiome was altered. Okay, I can see the difference. I mean, it's N of 1. It's not a big study. I can't say that it's statistical in any way. But nevertheless, his brother has no allergies whatsoever. Okay, so changing microbiome definitely changes something in the immune response. Okay. And yes, they can acquire all kinds of weird stuff from vaginal canal, and we'll talk about it eventually. Okay. Food everywhere. So that's where we get them. Don't worry, you don't have to know that map. God forbid. No, it's just an example of different sites studied for microbiome. So a few things. Circles are commensals, so normal microbes. Often in the microbiome studies, commensal microbes imply that they are harmless. They may be beneficial, but they are at least harmless. Stars are potential pathogens. Okay, so like this one. Sorry, it's not aligned, so I can barely draw. But what I want to highlight, so cheek, plague, and tongue, the yellow, red, and kind of a maroon colored microbes. You see how that they share a lot of things in common. Okay, I will try again. Okay, so yellow, red, and maroon. They represent microbes found on the cheek, plaque, on the teeth, and on the tongue. They're all in the same location, a lot of things in common. But if we will try to compare the gray skin, okay, or that's completely off the charts, the blue stool, they have virtually nothing in common. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's just, and you're going to find so many interesting things here. Like one species may dominate something. Like lactobacilli are the most common among the vaginal microbiome. Prevotella, which belongs to Prevotella and Bacteroidetes in the guts. Strep, well, not the strep that causes the strep throat, different strep. Teeth. So it is often species specific, and it's really important to understand which microbes can be found where. Now the fun part. We're going to talk a little. That's going to be the last one, but that usually causes a lot of realization of new things. So we're going to talk types of infectious diseases. First of all, if microbe gets into the site that already bears microbiome, is it hard to establish infection? Yes, a lot of competition. Sterile sites are more sensitive to infection. What is sterile in the human body? Lungs, spleen, huh? Say again. Come on. What? Yes. Pretty much the urinary tract, kidneys, urinary bladder, ureters, liver. It's easier to say what is not, okay? Sterile. Blood, all internal fluids that are contained in the body are sterile. Saliva, before it enters the mouth. Any secretions like mucosal secretions before they enter like the gut tract. Brain is sterile. Although there are some suggestions that it's not, but spinal cord, cerebrospinal fluid is sterile. Spinal cord is sterile. Blood is sterile. Urine before it enters urethra is sterile, okay? We're mostly sterile. So if microbe gets into one of those sterile sites, we boned. Does that make sense? So what is infection? Infection is when microbe replicates. That is important. I worked with mouse cytomegalovirus. I could inject it into myself. It does not replicate in humans. There's no infection. Does that make sense? To have an infection, you have the replication. Infection does not have to have signs or symptoms. Okay? You may have what is called inapparent or asymptomatic infection. Microbe replicates, but you have no idea what happens. That it happens, okay? You're not aware of that. Does that make sense? Hmm?
Like when VRE in patients
Yes.
is colonized, you're asymptomatic, your vital signs are fine, you're not showing or exhibiting symptoms
Absolutely.
of the infection.
But you're infected. Yeah. So if there's a replication, you're infected. Communicable versus non-communicable disease. Communicable disease is the one that can be transmitted from patient to patient. Give me an example. C. diff. C. diff, yeah, well, it is C. diff is communicable, but it's really hard to communicate because, I mean, if somebody,
I have 3 patients rooms in a row that have been from the same.
it's in direct transmission, yes. Flu, non-communicable diseases. Give me examples.
Like pneumonia, unless you have like a really weak immune system, that's possible.
Say again?
It's only like pneumonia unless you have a really weak immune system.
It's still communicable because you cough. And pneumonia can be different, but meningococcal pneumonia, pneumococcal pneumonia can be transmitted. Rabies cannot be transmitted from human to human. You dead end. Okay? Does that make sense? West Nile virus is not transmitted from human to human. It is zoonosis, that's a different story, we'll talk about it. But it's not transmitted from human to human, okay? The contagiousness, that's going to be the last thing because I want to cover other stuff. Nosocomial infections, hospital acquired. We've discussed why they are so common. You have a lot of sick people in the close quarters. That's it. That make sense? Iatrogenic. Have you seen this word before? Iatrogenic disease is the disease that comes after the medical procedure. Does that make sense? Huh? For instance, yes, wound infection result of the medical procedure. Okay, there are, for instance, if you have a patient with latent form of cytomegalovirus, and this patient gets a transplant. Okay, patient gets an infected transplant and develops systemic CMV. That's iatrogenic CMV. Does that make sense? Result of medical procedure. Okay? Zoonotic. Acquired from animals. Any examples? Huh? Rabies. West Nile. Yellow fever. Zika. Plague. Tularemia. Brucellosis. What's that? The anthrax. There's a bunch of them. Okay? Now, contagious. When we say the disease is contagious, we refer to its ability to transmit. The more contagious the disease is, the easier it transmits. Common cold, is that contagious? Yes. So contagiousness is measured in so-called basic reproduction number. I don't want to go into the details of a model, how it's calculated. You have to understand a few things. First, it's very artificial. So really, it's very artificial. Second, it allows you to compare diseases, but you have to keep in mind other factors. Like this table shows you the relative contagiousness of diseases based on the basic reproduction number. You can see that Ebola is on the bottom of the list. But if I will go around that room, chain you all to your chairs, and we'll start to rub the Ebola-infested blood into your mouth, you're all going to get infected. It's going to be 100%, right? Or I'm Ebola infected, I chain you and I spit in your mouth. You're all going to get infected, trust me. So, like during that epidemic in Africa, if you have a custom, local custom, that everybody, like 150 relatives, all have to kiss the deceased before they put him in the grave, out of 150, a good portion is going to get infected. So, I mean, you can't really rely on human brain in this case. What is interesting, though, is you will compare things like influenza or Ebola. They're not very contagious normally. The most contagious disease that we know is measles. Let me give you a comparison of how contagious the diseases are. I told you, probably I told you the story about that American, I'm going to be done pretty soon, just the guy contracted Ebola in Africa, came to New York, went like bowling and partying and having fun. Not a single person was infected. For measles, the pretty accurate model is you have a party room with 200 people. You have measles, you walk into that room. You walk out of that room 2 hours later, not talking to each other. 200 people are infected. Measles is extremely contagious, absolutely unbelievably contagious. Okay? So you have to keep in mind that severity of infection, how bad it is, like HIV, nobody wants to have HIV, right, is not that contagious. Chances to acquire HIV during sexual intercourse are pretty low. Well, depends on the type of intercourse. Okay? So when we think about how bad the disease is, we have to separate the symptoms and the ability of the microbe to infect. Okay? That's going to be it.